Hey everyone, Brandon here from TruckSafe. In January of 2023, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, or FMCSA, announced inflation-adjusted increases to its civil penalties. Now, it's probably no surprise to you that the FMCSA is vested with the authority to enforce its safety regulations by assessing civil penalties. It's really no different than any other governmental agency imposing fines for other types of non-compliance. That in mind, there are some nuances to the FMCSA's civil penalties which are worth exploring, at least at a high level. That's what we're discussing in this video, so stay tuned and do us a favor, hit the like and subscribe buttons below if you find this type of content helpful. Okay, so the FMCSA, which regulates highway transportation and interstate and sometimes intrastate commerce, follows a very specific process to issue civil penalties, which is known as the Notice of Claim procedure. This procedure is set out in the FMCSA's regulations in Part 386, and it essentially involves the agency documenting the discovered violations in writing and then serving them on the motor carrier or driver through what's known as a Notice of Claim. This notice describes the violations, and it includes the calculated penalties associated with those particular violations. The notice then goes on to detail the carrier's or the driver's right to appeal or to negotiate the fine, and it also provides instructions for paying the fine. Now, the agency is empowered to issue notices of claims and corresponding penalties following the discovery of any regulatory violations in any context. In our experience, however, these notices most often follow DOT audits, in which the agency has discovered fairly significant regulatory violations. We've discussed DOT audits and their consequences in other videos. Suffice it to say, it's less common for a carrier or a driver to receive notices of claims based on violations discovered during roadside inspections. But that's certainly a possibility, particularly if there is a significant pattern of noncompliance discovered in those inspections. So how exactly are FMCSA civil penalties calculated? Well, the FMCSA's regulations contain a penalty schedule in Appendix B to Part 386. And this penalty schedule sets out the maximum allowable penalties for certain categories of violations. Importantly, these are maximum penalty amounts, meaning that they are caps on the allowable fines for each category of violations. As I mentioned, the agency recently announced inflation-adjusted increases to these maximum penalty amounts. As shown in the chart here, the penalty schedule sets a maximum penalty for certain record-keeping violations of $1,496 for each day the violation continues, up to a maximum of $14,960. So let's say that during an audit, the FMCSA finds that the carrier failed to have compliant driver qualification files in place for its drivers. In that circumstance, the FMCSA's regulations allow it to impose a maximum penalty of up to $14,000 and change for that particular violation. Now, it's important to understand, however, the FMCSA very rarely imposes the maximum allowable penalties for discovered violations. This is because the agency has a statutory obligation to take several factors into consideration when calculating the actual amount of penalties on a case-by-case basis. Specifically, the FMCSA is bound by federal statute to consider the following factors: the nature, circumstances, extent, and gravity of the violation, the violator's degree of culpability, any history of prior offenses, and the potential effect of the penalty on the carrier's ability to continue to do business. The way that the FMCSA does this is through utilization of what's known as the Uniform Fine Assessment Worksheet, or UFA for short. Now, this worksheet takes into account these various factors and then calculates a penalty amount that will then be included on the notice of claim that is sent to the carrier or the driver. Okay, so what are your options if you happen to receive a civil penalty from the FMCSA? Well, carriers and drivers have a few options when it comes to responding to those types of notices. First of all, Part 386 allows affected individuals to file appeals of the notices if they believe they were issued in error. These appeals are adjudicated through the DOT's Office of Administrative Hearings, and if they proceed to hearing, will be heard and decided by an administrative law judge. These appeals are fairly formal in nature, and they often involve the document discovery process, briefing, and an administrative appeal. So if you wish to appeal a civil penalty, we strongly recommend you get legal counsel involved early on in that process. Other options for responding to a notice of claim include participating in binding arbitration, where the FMCSA and the carrier or the driver will try and reach a less formal resolution of the civil penalty. And then lastly is an even more informal settlement negotiation process with the FMCSA directly. Lastly, carriers and drivers certainly have the option to pay the full penalty without dispute if they just want it to go away. All right, so let's wrap up with a quick look at some of the FMCSA's enforcement data from 2022. Each year, the FMCSA publishes this type of data on its closed enforcement cases, including the names of the carriers or individuals against whom the fines were assessed, the civil penalty amounts, and the types of violations at issue in each case. In 2022, the agency settled a total of 3,357 civil penalty cases against motor carriers for a total of $23,545,861. The most common regulatory violations contributing to these fines include failing to properly test drivers for drugs and alcohol, using drivers who are not properly licensed, and driver log falsifications. All right, that's going to wrap things up for this video. If you have any questions about civil penalties or how to deal with them, please feel free to get in touch with us through our website at trucksafe.com. And for even more in-depth information about these types of regulatory topics, be sure to check out our innovative online compliance courses for safety managers and for drivers over at trucksafeacademy.com. Lastly, be sure to check out our detailed compliance articles on our website and follow us on our various social media pages for the latest highway transportation news and analysis. Thanks for watching.